Hi there. So before we begin, I might better save a lot of you some extra time and frustration, especially those that don't have the experience or that don't have a proper soldering iron or a solder sucker. 'Cause soldering on these units can be a bit frustrating and cumbersome for those that don't have the proper tools or experience doing it. So, a quick way of just checking is if you take if have your unit open already, or if you take the little rubber grommet off the switch cover and you look inside, and if the little piece of the switch remaining looks like this, it's still square and has this little metal armature intact in place still, uh, I can show you a way of just replacing the missing pieces. Okay, so I know it's painful, but I would suggest watching the whole video, even though I'm showing how to solder and stuff. Um, it would also show you how to put the unit back together. And at the end of the whole video, I do show a way of just replacing those missing pieces for those that want to take that approach. So here we go, and good luck. Hi there. So I'm going to go over just about everything I can in regards to replacing the switch on your Pro-Pointer. So first we're going to go over how to open the unit. Now for those of you who are opening this for the first time and maybe have a good switch, it's important to know how to do this, because opening it improperly you're going to break the switch, and that's likely why most of you are here. So the first thing you need to do is to remove the little screw, Phillips screw, out of the back. It's a single screw. It holds the battery holder and the main board into the unit. Once that is out, you can use your fingernail or maybe a little screwdriver and gently pry out the little grommet that covers the switch. It's a friction fit, so it should pop out quite easily. Later on it'll go in quite easy as well. So once you have those two things out, this is the very important part, and this is why most people break their switch. You need to make sure that the switch is in the down position, the on position. It's in the lowest point. If you don't do this and you try and slide the board out, you're going to break the switch. So if you hold it to the side and you press the switch on and off, you can easily see when it's high and when it's low. So you have to have it in the lowest point. So once you have that set properly, you can sort of just grab a hold of the battery holder and gently slide out the main board. Okay, you want to make sure it's not binding or it's not catching. And you want to slide that out. Well, I just can't quite get a good grip of it, so I'm just going to grab a little pair of needle nose pliers and give it a gentle pull. It should come out easy. You shouldn't have to force it out. Okay, so there, I got the board out, and the switch is still intact. And now we'll move on to how to replace this switch. Okay, so the best way, and the highly recommended way of removing, in most cases it's a broken switch, is you need a solder sucker. Okay, it's a little spring operated, usually plunger device, that when you apply heat to your solder joints, when you use a soldering iron, you apply heat and the solder is melted, you push a button on a little solder sucker and it does a quick little suction, removing the molten solder. So this is the highly recommended way of removing switches, components, anything electronic. It's a lot less invasive than any other way of doing it. So I'm just going to do a couple of them here real quick just to show you. You want to make sure your soldering iron is clean, that you have no junk or stuff on it, so that you're only heating up and removing the solder on the specific joint. So you hold the soldering iron against the pin. As soon as you can see that the solder is melted, you go in right at the same time and you do a solder sucker on it. So I'm going to skip that for all the other ones. And I'm going to go over another option, another way of doing this for those that don't have a solder sucker. I'm guessing those of you that have a solder sucker would just know how to do this offhand anyways. So the other way to do it, and I really don't like doing it this way, but if you don't have a solder sucker, this is one of a few options that you can do this. So basically what you want to do is take a pointed device like this little awl that I have, and you want to get behind the unit between the board and the component. You could just use a little pair of needle nose maybe and grab it gently, but you just want to apply a little bit of pressure, pulling it away on one side. So there's a set of pins on the left and on the right. Now I'm going against one of the set of pins on the right here. So you have pins on this side, you have pins on that side. So pick a side and try and apply pressure against one of those sides so that you're sort of pulling those pins a little bit, applying a little bit of pressure. So I'm pushing down gently on that awl just to give a little bit added pressure. I'm just pushing down a little bit. And as I heat up the 3 pins, you want to try and heat up the 3 pins on that one side where I'm applying pressure. You want to heat them all up at the same time as best you can. So that way all 3 pins are molten solder, and then they can be pulled away out of the board. So as I'm applying a little bit of pressure, I'm trying to quickly scan across the 3 pins. So there you can see that it actually pulled it out a little bit. You don't want to apply too much pressure because you could actually break the traces, some of the actual wire traces on the board. So you got to be cautious in how you do this. So now I'm going to go to the other side, and I'm going to apply some pressure against the other set of pins. So I'm just putting it in there just enough that I can get a little bit of pressure against it to pry it up gently. And now I'm going to apply heat and the soldering iron to the other 3 pins, trying to heat all 3 at the same time the best I can. So apply a bit of pressure and just quickly go and heat all 3 and just quickly rake the soldering iron back and forth. Okay, again, you want to have the tip of your soldering iron as clean as you can. And there you can see I've pulled the other side out even further in this case. So you just want to continue doing this from side to side. So in this case, my awl, it's a bit too thin. I can't easily get in there and apply pressure that easily. So I'm actually going to take a little screwdriver that I have. It just fits in there nicely. So I'm going to put the screwdriver in there, and I'm just going to, instead of applying pressure down, I'm actually just going to give it a little twist. So the twisting is enough, a gentle twisting is enough to apply pressure. And again, I'll heat the side where I'm twisting and applying pressure to. Now when you heat the pins, you don't want to keep the soldering iron in the same spot for too long. Okay, you want to quickly go across all 3 so that all 3 are ideally melt at the same time. If you hold that soldering iron in one spot for more than, I'd say, 3 seconds, you could start burning the board, burning the traces on there. So you have to be cautious in how long and how much you do that. So here it came out just to the point where it's just barely touching. As the solder cooled, the end of the pin was just touching and it's stuck. So all I have to do is use my finger, give it a little bit of pressure, and just give it a quick zap with the iron in there. It's come out, it's come free. So You can see how much more work this is. If you had a soldering iron, you would have been long gone, done a long time ago. I'd recommend skipping doing it this way because you could wreck your board and the traces. I'd almost recommend going and buying a soldering sucker. You can pick them up for anywhere from like $5 to, I'd say, $15 on Amazon or your local electronics store. So there we go. I've applied pressure and I've gotten, I got the switch out. So I was gentle, I didn't apply too much pressure, and I didn't apply heat for too long at a time, so there's no damage to the board or to the traces. So now the holes are still filled with solder. I don't have a solder sucker, so I'm going to show you a quick way without a solder sucker how to clean up the holes and get the solder out of it. Alright, so to clean the solder out of the holes, if you can get yourself some stranded wire. Okay, you want stranded wire that's going to fit within the hole. Okay, it can't be too thick. So in this case, I got some fine stranded wire from an old set of like cheap speakers or the like. Okay, stranded wire works way better for this than a solid core wire because it has a lot more surface area. And what you want to do is, ideally, it's not mandatory, but it helps, is if you have some flux, plumbing flux will work. You just want to apply a little bit of flux to your wire. Okay, what that does is it helps the solder to flow better, and it cleans up any sort of oxidization and dirt on the wire, so it helps to suck up the solder. And you want to have that a twist in that wire, so it's so it'll go in better. This piece I have is maybe a bit too long. Would have been easier to work if I had it a bit shorter. But you just apply a little bit of heat and you keep twisting it and moving it up and down. So I've already cleaned out that first hole. Apply a bit of heat. I'm twisting it and I'm sort of moving it up and down in the hole as I apply a bit of heat. And there I did 2 out of the remaining 2. The other ones I did off camera, but there you can see it actually cleaned up the holes. Alright, so next is cleaning the board. So after you've removed your switch, you want to remove any trace elements and residue and that's on the board. It'll just help the solder flow and stick better basically when you go to put your new switch in. So the best thing you can use is isopropyl alcohol. If you don't have it, you know, you might better get away with just taking a Q-tip and licking it just to get it a little bit damp, just to remove any residue and stuff. So if you do have isopropyl alcohol, I take a soft toothbrush and dip it in there, just give it a gentle little scrub. I then take a clean Q-tip or a Kleenex and just give it a quick little wipe. Try not to contaminate the board with any chunks of Kleenex or Q-tip, but basically it just removes the residue and helps everything to connect better. So installing the new switch. So I'll give a link later on the bottom of the video where I get my switches. So again, if you have flux, plumbing flux or some sort of flux, if you can apply just a little bit to the pins, it just helps to clean off the oxidization and helps the solder flow better. If you don't have it, you know, it's not mandatory, but it just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so when you go to put the switch in, the switch goes on the same side as the LED, same side as the little vibrating motor. So the switches that I get have a little blue dot on the one side. That just helps to direct which way the switch goes. In this case, the blue dot goes towards the LED. So you need to make sure that the switch is firmly set in place. It can't be held crooked. It has to be completely flush with the board. So what I do is I hold it on the one side, I hold it flush, take my soldering iron. You want to make sure the soldering iron again is clean, doesn't have blobs of solder or garbage on it. It needs to be clean. I like to take just a little bit of solder at a time, load up the tip of the soldering iron, and I touch it to the pin. Okay, you don't want to have too much on there, because if you put too much solder on there and you touch it, you might actually solder two pins together. That can be undone, but it's not easy, especially if you don't have a solder sucker. Even if it takes one or two passes, one or two little attempts to get that pin soldered in place, that's better than doing too much at a time. And again, you don't want to hold it for more than, I'd say, 3 seconds on a pin. Sorry, this is a bit hard to do because I don't have the camera in front of me and a tripod, and I'm trying to work around all that stuff. So usually this is a bit easier to do for me, but with the camera in place, it's a bit more difficult. So there you go. I got all 6 pins soldered in place, and you're good to go. Quick check on the other side to make sure it's flush. If it isn't, you may have to go apply a little bit of pressure, and you may have to go and reheat those pins to make sure it's completely flush. If it's not flush, it just won't go into the unit without breaking the switch again. So next, you want to remove the battery holder. It's easy to do. It's one little screw. And what this does for you is it helps make it a lot easier to slide the unit into the Pro-Pointer, because it's kind of hard to see where the tracks are within the unit, and it just makes it that much easier to align everything up and to get it in place. Alright, so here we're going to get into one of the last steps, inserting the board. So before you slide the board in, you have to make sure the switch again is in the down position, the lowest position, which is actually the on position. If you don't and you slide that switch in, you could break the switch again and you may have to start all over. So double check, triple check, make sure it's in the down lowest position. Okay, when you go to slide the board into the system, when I buy my switches, this piece of fishing line, this piece of string comes with it just to help you out. And what you want to do is put a little hook about an inch or so from the end of the board, just a little hook in the wire so that you can get your string or fishing line around it. And what this does is, as you align the board into the slots on the left and right side, and as you start sliding it down, you want to ensure that that wire, the main cable, is not getting caught up on any of the traces on any of the components. It's not getting caught up at the front of the board and getting hung up. So you want to make sure that it stays sort of coiled and is laying between the board and the bottom of the unit. So putting a little hook in there, sliding the board in, and just a gentle tug to make sure that the wire's staying out of the way. So before you push the board in all the way, you got to put the battery holder back in. You want to put it the same way in that you took it out. You can see from the picture here which way it goes. Again, it's just a single screw that you put in place. Sorry, my hand's in the way there. Okay, I'm just going to straighten it out, make sure it's in snug. It's good. So then, just before I slide it all the way in, I know my wire is good, it's not cut up. And I'm going to take the string out, and you're going to gently push the board, the rest of the unit back in. Okay, it shouldn't be forced in. If you find that you're having to really push and having to force it in, uh, then you probably have the wire hung up or something. The board may not be in the tracks properly. You may have to pull it out and start over again by inserting it in there. So, and it should be, that switch should be centered in that hole back where it started. Okay, then you want to put your screw back in. The screw, make sure that it's snug and it's lined up in place and that it's not going to slide out. And our last step is putting the grommet back in, the little rubber cover over the switch. You just put one side in and you just start sort of working your way around, giving it a little pinch, getting it in there. You might better use a blunt screwdriver just to get it in, and it's friction fit, and you're done. So here's some additional information on the switch. So it looks like the switch that the factory's using, seems like they were trying to save money. It's a single pole switch. So what this means is when you push the button, it activates the pins on the one side of the switch. Even though the board has two sets of pins, they're only using the one set, one side. As a test, I was able to short out the pins on the other side. This also activates and turns the unit on in the same manner. So the switch that I use actually activate both sets of pins independently. So it doubles the chances and gives, in my opinion, a more secure and a better connection overall. So in theory, it should be more reliable. So there we go. So here I'm going to go over a way to fix the switch without doing any soldering. It's just a matter of replacing the spring, the clip, and the little plastic push pin component. If you just do it in the right sequence, it goes in and snaps in actually quite quickly and easily, and should save you a lot of time and frustration. So here we go. Alright, so let's go through how we can take parts from a new switch and use them to replace or fix broken parts or missing parts from your Pro-Pointer. So the first thing you need to do is you want to make sure the switch is in the up position, okay, the highest position. That way the spring isn't compressed, and when you open the unit up, it's not going to spring parts flying across the room. So you want to take a little needle or a little sharp device and just gently, carefully under each flap, just lift it up enough that it'll release from being snapped in. So again, you just get underneath there and you want to apply very little pressure, just enough to get in there, and that'll be enough to spring it apart. You don't want to lift it up because if you bend it, then you've broken it. So you can see here the pieces are still straight, and that way they can be reused and snap back in when you go to continue on. Alright, let's cover replacing the switch parts. Now if the remaining base that's still on your board is missing this little metal clip, if it's not there, then I'll just quickly show you how to put it back in. So if you've recovered it, if you've been able to get it out of the unit, or you can pull it out of the new switch that I previously showed you how to open up, all you have to do is remove the clip out of that one. This is how you put it back in. So you just want to get a pair of tweezers and you want to hold it by the short end. I'll show you here. So if you just hold it closer to the short end, and you want to feed the longer piece in through that little plastic loop that's at the front on the bottom there. There's a little sort of loop, and you feed it through that. You want to then angle it up, and then it sort of nestles between the two little clips at the back. In the back there's a little set of clips. It sort of snaps into that little back, and then it's back into place. So first or next, depending on where you're at. You want to take the spring, and what you want to do is you want to sort of set it in to the little nib. Okay, this little plastic nib on the base of the switch. This is actually the clip that holds that little wire in place. Okay, you just want to line it up and set it on there. Okay, it doesn't really snap into place, it just sort of holds it into place. And that's what sort of holds the spring in place. Okay, just like that. So I'm going to set this to the side, and I'll just show you the next step here. Okay, so the other piece is the little plastic collar. Okay, both clips or both sides are actually the same. So it's the same clip on both sides. So it doesn't really matter which way you have it. Though I'm going to use, in this case, I'm going to use the one that has the blue side, the blue dot, just as a reference so I can keep track of what side I'm at. So you take the plunger, and this plunger has 4 sides. 2 sides have the little metal connectors. Okay, and it has a front, I'll call it a front and a back. Okay, so the front has these little grooves in it. There's these little dug in sort of grooves, and those grooves are what that metal wire that's attached to the base of the switch uses to guide into. So you want to use the front of it. The back is flat, has nothing on it. We'll call that the front. Okay, so you want to take the front of the plunger, and it's going to be aligned with one of the clips. In this case, I'm going to use a blue one so I can keep track of it. So I take the plunger, the front of the plunger that has the grooves, and in this case I'm going to align it with what I want to use as a reference, which is the blue clip. Okay, and what you want to do is you basically want to line it up, and so that the spring goes up the center of that plunger shaft. So if you look at the plunger shaft, it's sort of hollow, it has an opening. I'll just try and zoom in here to show you. So there's a hollow opening in the plunger in there, and that's where the spring's going to go when you line it up. Right in there. Okay, so I take the front of this plunger. Okay, the front with the grooves is going to face the LED. That's the front. And you basically line it up. Okay, remember the grooves on the front. Yeah. So you line it up. So the spring goes up the center of the shaft. Okay, once you get the spring up the center, you gently snap it into place. Now, you shouldn't have to force it. And once you get it lined up, you just feel that it easily is meant to be, and it just simply, the front and back clips snap right in. Okay, so they're going to be flush with the switch. They snap in nicely, and the front and back are flush, and you're good to go. Hopefully you have saved yourself all kinds of soldering and all kinds of extra work by doing it this way. So there we go. I hope this helped, and good luck.